Watch or listen. Across the United States, we've seen a rise in violent crime: murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assaults. Major cities across the United States are reporting a 50% increase in homicides and a 36% increase in aggravated assaults. Today, we'll discuss the rise in violent crime and its underlying causes. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another edition of the Weekly Chat. Today, we are having a very serious conversation, a conversation on violence and community. And I'm very proud to have with me today two individuals who are Dekalb grown, that work in different areas, but who have the capacity to engage in the conversation. First, I'd like to thank retired Judge Mark Anthony Scott for joining us. 18 years with the Division 9 Superior Court. And also I have joining me today Major Romaldo Hughes, DeKalb County East Precinct, and 29 years in law enforcement. So across the United States, we have seen an uptick in violent crime. DeKalb County is no different. Here in DeKalb, we have seen actually a lowering in crime overall. However, violent crime is up. According to the Major Cities Report, America has seen a 50% increase in homicides since 2019 and a 30% increase in aggravated assaults. When we talk about crime, I think it's really important for us to understand, sitting where I sit as your commissioner, of course, crime has many implications. It affects economic development, it affects quality of life, it affects property rates. But what is causing us to become increasingly more violent? So at this point, gentlemen, I sort of want to bring the conversation over to you. I'm going to begin with you first, Major, because of course you are out there on the street. You interact with individuals on a daily basis who are on the opposite side of the law. And what have you seen over your years? Tell us about it.
Well, over my career, I've seen an increase of violence, as you just spoke about. What we're seeing now is people are lacking conflict resolution skills. There was a time in my career where we would respond to a call and individuals that were having a disagreement would be able to, raise their voices, talk it out. We would just come to mediate. Now, it seems like the first line of defense or the first action is violence. So now when we're responding to the same types of calls where we were going to mediate, unfortunately now we're responding, these locations are become crime scenes. So people just aren't talking anymore. And there seems to be an anger among individuals now amongst one another.
And one of the questions that I have too, is there a particular age group that you're seeing more than others? Because of course I see the statistics, but is this, and you're absolutely right, growing up as I did in Alabama, people got upset. They may have a fist fight, but you didn't automatically shoot or kill. That was never an option. But now it seems that violence is the form of resolution. And I will say that I truly believe that hurt people hurt people. So it's deeper than just the actions. Or is it also that somehow we're failing to raise our children? And I know for you, Judge Scott, for people who can't control themselves, they end up in your court. They have been for years. And for you, what are you seeing as it relates to crime and in particular violence?
Well, a couple of things. First, I see a erosion and deterioration of core values in the family. And I have to ask myself, did anyone in your household ever teach you that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal? if you have no shame, you have no guilt, you have no remorse, then your first resolve is to pick up a gun and shoot your opponent. And that is disturbing on a number of levels. We see it throughout America. I think it goes to more than just the erosion of values in the household. I think some of it, and there's a national debate around the role of the Second Amendment in our society and guns in our society.
Right.
And somehow the debate has deteriorated as if that's all right. And we've seen it this past week with the shooting, maiming of a young boy, 16, who knocks on the wrong door, the killing of a young lady in New York, another young lady who just simply opens the door. Where does this come from? It's in the national spotlight, it's in the national media, and I think in some ways it's a reflection of national leaders not taking a strong stance against violence in our society. And we see other people that buy into this, and that's unfortunate.
And when we talk about the accessibility of guns, and in particular too, this conversation can go in a lot of ways, because I actually presented a resolution to declare gun violence a public health crisis in Dekalb County because of what we are seeing out there. But on the federal level, even though there has been some, shall I say, addressing of laws, but, as a police officer, when you're going up against semi-automatic weapons, how is it now that people are so comfortable? It amazes me that we have so many guns in society. It shouldn't be that simple to access a gun. So it does. It takes what I often call a conglomerate approach. Mm-hmm. We have to have laws that restrict, but beyond that, and people who are in favor of guns, they often say guns don't kill people, people kill people. So it definitely goes back to core morals and values, and in terms of the violent nature of young people, as you interact with them, what has been, or is there ever conversation to help you get insight into their mentality and why we deal with so much violence?
Well, I think a large part of it also has to do with social media, the music that's being played, and also things that they're seeing on television. If you think about most of your popular television shows are all surrounded with some type of violence, and it's been glorified in our society. The music that young people are listening to now, they glorify violence at a higher level than in times past. When we were growing up, we were listening to songs about going on a date and, going to the ice cream shop. Now they're listening to songs talking about getting money by any means necessary. And if you do something I don't like, or if you disrespect me, I'll bring my gat or I'll bring my gun, and whatever the terminology they use. And it's been just proliferated throughout our society now that guns are the answers to, things that are going on in our society.
And Judge Scott, I want to hear from you as well.
Well, can I take the conversation in a little bit different direction? Because I have given some thought to, if I were put in charge of reducing violence in our society, what would I do? Would I eradicate guns in American society altogether? The answer is no, because I don't think there are a group of Americans, a group of Dekalbites, a group of Georgians who will never give up their guns because of the Second Amendment. And I don't want us to forget the historical perspective that America was founded, they were a breakaway colony or colonies from King George. They didn't like what he did, so they took up arms to fight him. And they said, we will never be without our firearms. So the right to bear firearms, the Second Amendment to our Constitution.
And let me also say, most of us, because I will say that we have guns in our home, but we're not the individuals that's perpetuating the crime.
All right, but let me
We will never use them against another person.
Let me have some fun with this.
Okay.
Just like we train young people that if they get behind the wheel of a car, that they can't drink and drive without putting others in danger, perhaps we're looking at this problem wrong. Instead of trying to eradicate guns in the society, why don't we look at an age-appropriate time in a child's life that we do give them gun education, gun safety training at 12 or 13. That's when the National Rifle Association says that the rites of passage for young men, they get their first 22s to go out and hunt squirrels. And what I've been told is that daddy or some responsible adult gives them a speech about what the appropriate role of guns are in the household and gun safety. Maybe we ought to be focusing our attention on gun safety rather than eradication. And that way, young people will know this is not a toy. And let me just share this with you. You know, I'm an Air Force veteran.
Interesting thought.
It is. I said it would be a little bit provocative for you. But let me share. I grew up in Virginia. I'd never touched a weapon, a gun, in my life until I went into the United States Air Force. And my household, I didn't grow up with guns in the house. And I'd never heard this before because I'd been on the street corners with young men and colleagues talking about, well, if they did that, I'd just shoot them. I'd give them a warning shot, or I'd shoot them in the leg, or I wouldn't shoot to harm or to kill. I'd shoot to harm or to warn. And then when I went into the military, in a military education, before they put that M16 in your hand and send you to the shooting range, they make it very clear: we do not shoot warning shots. We do not shoot to maim, we shoot to kill. Now that is a subject of debate in America about how we train law enforcement today. Center mass, not a finger, not a leg, not a knee, but center mass. And that was the first time I'd ever heard it. It was shocking to me. And I'm 67 years old, and I remember I was 19 when I heard that, and I remember it to this day. So maybe we need to focus our attention on better education so that children in our inner city schools, children around the world know this is not a toy. You pull it on someone, know that force can be met with force, and here's the proper use of a gun. And also the consequences of the action. That's right.
Honestly, what you just said, a few weeks ago, I had the Georgia Harm Reduction Coalition that visited the show. And they have an entire concept very similar to what you just said, that it doesn't work to say don't use drugs, but understanding that you will, helping people understand the consequences. And, I grew up in Alabama. We had rifles, pistols. My grandfather had an arsenal of guns. He was real close to the sheriff. And down there, 60s, 70s, sheriff get a gun, he take it from somebody, it might just be in the house. So I can only imagine, what was there nowadays when I think about, that relationship and how he just bring my grandfather a gun and so forth. But there was never the thought of harming people. And I do think too many young people make quick decisions without fully understanding the consequences. So I do believe, and see, that's why you're so valuable being on the show today. Now that you've retired from Dekalb, if laws prevented crime, we would be police officers.
That's right.
So I no longer believe that laws actually deter. Of course, we say the prison system is designed to reform and rehabilitate. But I don't see that happening either. So I think it's time that we begin to reimagine. And education is very important in all this.
Well, Commissioner, so you'll know, in Georgia, Georgia law schools, for the most part, abandoned the reform and rehabilitate model 40 years ago.
Oh, my God. Am I telling my age here?
Georgia prisons are designed to punish. They're not designed. That's why you can't, when we send someone to a Georgia prison, I don't know if you've noticed around the country, if you get sentenced in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they do offer opportunities to get advanced degrees, a GED, a college degree, etc., while you have this time on your hand. There are no advanced educational opportunities offered in Georgia. There are no college classes
in prison.
In prison, there's none of that. Now you may get some training and have some courses on how to handle dispute resolution, how to handle drug abuse, skill sets for that. But
that's disheartening because I've been
It's not a rehabilitation model.
Strictly to punish.
It's strictly to punish.
And how do you feel about that? Honestly,
well,
do you think that's the best model?
Certainly not, because
okay.
I think as a Christian, as a person who understands that people can change,
I agree.
That if you make a mistake,
it shouldn't be a death sentence.
That's right. We go to church
Yes.
in DeKalb County on Sunday. We have a church, not one church on every corner, but 2 or 3 on every corner. Big churches with ministers who preach and choirs who sing and just wonderful faith-based institutions throughout DeKalb.
Right.
And for us to go in on Sunday and say that you can be washed in the blood of Jesus and saved, but then you go to Georgia prison and never be heard of again is wrong.
I agree wholeheartedly. And, when I'm trying to think of the proper words here to utilize, but as many situations become teachable moments, okay? So the ability to educate and give you a second chance and opportunity. Because honestly, one of the things we hadn't talked about is economics. Because in DeKalb County, we allocate as commissioners a lot of money towards policing. And of course, we continue to struggle with the recruitment of officers in DeKalb County, okay? Very aware of that. But although we put the money on officers, we, in my opinion, have to address the economics. Because, I was doing a little research for the conversation, and I looked at factors that are associated with crime. And the first factor listed is economic conditions, poverty level, job availability, cultural factors such as education, recreational opportunities, religion is also a factor, as well as family unit. So I think we fail to have the necessary conversations, because oftentimes with young people, crime is associated or a direct byproduct, I truly believe, of economics. And if we provide equal access to opportunity, then that will help level the playing field. And I truly believe that it will help eradicate crime. So when we see the water boys, because often that during the summer becomes a major point of contention, those children are out there because they need money. So it's not an easy issue because there's so many different parts to it. And how or what programs do we have? Let's talk about that here in DeKalb that are designed for young people to help educate them to keep them away from the justice system. Can you talk about that for me?
Well, I know at the police department we have the PAL program. And the PAL program has been very instrumental in teaching young people work skills, conflict resolution skills. They're taught how to balance a checkbook, interviewing skills. So there's an array of skills that they're trying to teach young people so that they will know that there are other opportunities available to them. But if I could go back a minute, one of your quotes that has stood out with me is when you talk about making laws to help prevent crime. You said it, and you said it best. You can't legislate morality
or decency. I often say that,
and I so agree with that. And I think one of the things we're going to have to look at in trying to reduce crime is we're going to have to take a comprehensive approach. And we talk about it all the time, but it's going to take law enforcement, the faith-based community, the education system, the government, and we're going to have to all work together in one team. They don't teach civics in school anymore.
No.
When I grew up, civics was something that was taught. So you were taught not to throw trash out of the window. You were taught to respect elders, help older people across the street.
Be careful pointing at me as the elder.
when kids are not taught those basic core values, then when they grow up to become adults, they don't have that foundation. So now it's nothing to disrespect an elderly person or to disrespect authority. And when you have parents that will side with their child against people in authority, then what message are you sending to the kid?
And this is interesting because we can only have so many people per segment, but education is so important in society that I almost wish we had an educator here. Because I technically, I'm educated, 3 degrees, law school, a certificate and such. But beyond that, it is time, I believe, that we reimagine modern education. It is not enough now to only teach reading, writing, and arithmetic.
I so agree.
We have to teach conflict resolution. We have to teach soft skills. I believe we need to teach entrepreneurship so that we can help children understand that you can go out there. I actually believe, too, in the state of Georgia, we've done a poor job of making individuals aware that we have 18 different trades. If you receive a high school diploma, that you can pursue free of charge. And many of those trades will produce a higher income than an individual receives as a college graduate.
Yes.
Because college isn't for everyone, but I really believe everyone should have access to opportunity.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's what changes lives, and that's what changes trajectories. So I know, Judge, you've spent a lot of time putting people, and I want to thank you too, because I believe for 4 years we've had the Lock-In for Life, and it was a program that I started as a result of seeing what happens in community. And right now, as we're taping, we're getting ready to go into summer. And usually every year in right about this time, as soon as school ends, we see a major uptick in violence with young people. So I created that program because many need mentors, because often we expect that children are receiving guidance that they are not. And talk to me about, being a judge and working with young people and what you've experienced.
But I want to go back to something Major Hughes said about the PAL program. We kind of were yucking it up before we came into the show about him being Omega and me being a Kappa. But I want to give a shout out to all members of the Panhellenic, to the 100 Black Men, to all social and civic organizations, to church organizations. Because I know for us in Dekalb, everyone in my circle, tomorrow morning, we're going to be up mentoring some young man, some young woman, trying to keep them out of harm's way, trying to supplement what the family couldn't supplement. And we all have, and I know the Megas have a very vibrant youth program, Kappas have a very vibrant youth program, Deltas, AKs, etc. But the Panhandle does it. And Commissioner, one thing, you can point out some of the problems, but you've got to give yourself a pat on the back and all of your colleagues a pat on the back, because we do address problems in a different way in Dekalb, because we recognize and love these children and love the families.
Absolutely.
One of the things, and I think we've seen, and you've been to court with me and you've seen me, I cry. When I was on the bench, I cried with the families because I've gone to church with the families. I've participated in the community with the families. It breaks my heart when you see a young man, young woman errant in their ways, and we have to make some draconian decision because the Georgia General Assembly has removed discretion from judges, and where a child who is just trying, I remember as a young man growing up in Virginia that I grew up with 2 alcoholic parents, and I just wanted a teacher just to say, son, it's going to be all right. So I acted out. And it wasn't that I wanted to go to prison, I wanted to go to jail or be put out of school. I just wanted someone to say, this is not the way it's going to be all the time. And I see that in the court, that young men and young women have done horrific stuff, joined gangs, pulled guns or toy guns on people, and either shot or hurt or put someone in a horrific way. I know they weren't raised like that. I know that wasn't the expectations of the school system or the parents. And all I can say is, on one hand, my faith teaches me if you come down and join the church and confess your sins, that you'll be washed in the blood of Jesus. And you can believe whatever you want to believe, but that's one of the tenets of the Christian faith.
Absolutely.
But here before the state of Georgia, all we're going to do is take your freedom away and lock you up without any hope. And then we put those people back on the street at 28 and think that they're going to come out and sing "Come By Yard" like everything is all right. It's not. And it's programs like this and commissioners and public servants like you and Major Hughes who make a difference in keeping this community safe. Let me share one other thing to you that just happened this morning. We have a young man in 100 Black Men that called me last night. He's a senior at McNair High School, where we do most of our programs. And he is on his way to Morehouse with a full Gates scholarship that just got announced yesterday.
Wow.
So we don't see that's the story that we don't tell. He called me this morning, just bubbling, Judge, I'm so excited. And things can go other ways at a McNair or Columbia.
And had you all not had the presence in his life.
Or a Southwest Dekalb.
Right.
But that's the success story. And you're absolutely right about the school system. We, as a majority Black community, ought to be saying to our educators, guys, you can't go into these books and take what the majority group does and apply it to people who have come out of slavery, have not had an opportunity to participate in the society in an economic way, the way their counterparts, and say, rise up like everyone else. It doesn't work that way. So if you don't know, if you've not been taught that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, that I'm laughing. No. Major Hughes says, I'm one of those people. I was taught if you're older than me, it's yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. It is never yeah, nay, how you doing, what's up. It's never that. No. But if we don't teach the generations behind us these kind of core values, to respect the elderly in our community, to respect the people that have achieved in our community, that have stood up when they don't know, and you do this, and Major Hughes does this. He goes out on a call, he gets a call from one of his subordinates. I'm at a domestic call. How much courage does it take to wade into the middle of a domestic call and you don't know what you're up against? Guns, knives, drugs, disrespect. And they do it day and day. And we want to pay them pennies on the dollar. We ought to pay teachers, social workers, and law enforcement what they deserve. And our community ought to articulate that. You ought to come out of school making 100 or 6 figures to do these jobs. We call you when we need you. We expect you to raise our kids up. And we are the ones that need to put our foot down and say, stop being willy-nilly about the people that we value in our community.
And I could not have said it better. I sit here and of course, government, often people look at us for what they can't provide, okay? Whether it be housing, but even deeper, shall I say, than talking about, violence and crime itself. You've taught on so many important things. I immediately, as you started to talk about, the racial dynamics of inequity, I pulled up some numbers because oftentimes I'm absolutely shocked when I look at wealth in America. And honestly, when you look at crime and you look at statistics, they all align. There is a direct correlation between access and outcome. And according to the Federal Reserve, in 1990, and this is immediately what popped up, white households own 90.7% of household wealth in the United States, whereas black households owned 3.8% and Hispanic households own 2.1%. And when we talk about economic opportunity and we talk about inequity and we start looking at the underlying causes, Because when people are given access or have equal access, I don't know what it is about us in society that has not realized that we have to create a level playing field for all people. It's not enough to take individuals who have been traditionally disenfranchised, lacked access to opportunity, and we have to care a little bit more about people. It shouldn't be that educators, it shouldn't be that police officers, that firefighters, that people that are on the front line are not making good, decent salaries. Either we're going to spend it or we're going to spend it.
Well, that's right.
We're going
right. You either spend it on the front end or the back end.
Right.
And
Right.
The thought that came to mind for me was reparations. And we forget, I'm a graduate of Howard Law School, Howard University School of Law, and we talk about reparations, and Howard is named after the first director of the Freedmen's Bureau that was founded after the Emancipation Proclamation to help slaves re-enter the society. And that was General O.O. Howard. And General Howard was the one that introduced the idea that you can't free a group of people and just say you're free and now go out there and do. So that's how we got 40 acres and a mule. I think we ought to put on our creative thinking hat and recognize that in order to create in years to come, because you can't make up for the lack of 40 acres and a mule and resources to be reintegrated into the society or integrated into the society, that we can do. There are small governmental policies that we could do. For instance, if you live below the poverty line, and I say the poverty line is $400,000 or less, that anyone makes it $400,000 or less, that they ought not, black, white, blue, yellow, whatever, they ought not to pay any taxes. Because it takes those resources to get a house, to feed your family, to have transportation and educational opportunities. So that's a small policy. Pay the public servants who serve in our community what they're worth. And if I don't want to use the term defund police, but I would use the term to redirect some resources. Instead of putting the money into the prisons, why can't we look at taking some of that money and putting it in some of the schools, or bolstering a chapter of Omega Psi Phi or Kappa or 100 black women or Deltas or AKAs, and say, you go out and lift this community up in a way that you've got educators and program resources, as opposed to relying on volunteers. We all, the three of us around this table, when we volunteer for a group, whether it be in church, fraternity, social, we know we've taken on a second job. Because when you get off from work, you got to go home and do the work to make that program work.
And it never stops.
It never stops.
Yeah, and when it comes to PAL, PAL is responsible for the midnight basketball program. And I know personally, I know initially I funded $25,000. I believe my second allocation was $20,000, and I was absolutely shocked. Oftentimes when you are who I am, you do what you know to be right. You may not always be present for it, but you put the money in the hands of individuals who can handle the programming. And I remember the first time I stopped by, it was taking place at the South Dekalb YMCA. There were almost 200 young people there that night. Now, had we not funded that program and brought those kids into a constructive environment,
who knows where they may have been that
where
night,
would they be?
and what would they have been doing?
And you know that old saying, idle time makes an idle mind, and an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So if we're not getting children and we're not giving them constructive things, and that's why I put so much effort there. I'm very excited to have a youth farm going on that I created, and I was raised on a farm. And, for me, that we've got to give them more constructive things, because even when it comes to, we've talked about television and what they're seeing there, but these young people really are lacking socialization skills in many instances, in my opinion. And that's what makes them so violent when they're confronted, because they're not used to, in some instances, even the human interaction.
No, everything's electronic.
It's all electronic.
And when we talk about, I'm sorry, Judge.
No, go ahead.
And when we talk about doing things and providing for the kids, I think one of the components we miss is you can't take a kid for a couple of hours and infuse constructive, ideas and thoughts into them and then put them back in the home with a destructive environment. So we have to start considering what are we teaching the parents of the kids that we're mentoring? Because I can spend time with them all day, but if it's mom and dad or who's ever in the home, if they're teaching them something in opposition to what we're teaching them, then pretty much what I've taught them is going to get canceled out because that's where they spend the majority of their time. So we can't neglect circling back and trying to take these parents up along with the kids.
There's another component. I have a good friend that used to be at the Department of Human Services, Robert Nibbs, and I can't think of the former commissioner, but they were trying to introduce a program that taught young black males or young people that if you just stay in high school and get a diploma, defer marriage and defer having a child, that your income would triple almost just on those three things. You didn't have to get a college degree, just stay in high school, get a high school diploma and not have children. Barack Obama calls it delayed gratification. But you point out another, I think, real important problem in our society besides guns, in our community besides guns, and that's addiction and mental health services.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
As I've presided over all four of the accountability courts in DeKalb County, and I can tell you that addiction services, people ought not to have to come downtown Decatur and be involved with the criminal justice service system to get assistance. Mm-hmm. So we need, that whole process with the community service board. We need lots of resources out there for people that find themselves addicted to drugs, because a lot of times drugs, to fuel the drug use, sex is used to fund the drug addiction. Children come out of that, and then we expect those children to be raised in a household by addicted or non-present parents, that they will be taught core values: thou shalt not steal, kill, yes sir, no sir. And you're right. I mean, that's one of the. I'm sure it is for Major Hughes that if you have a program that you see children, young people, twice a month on the weekends, you can only ask yourself, how much good am I doing? Because they go back into the school system, same environment. And they want to be accepted, which is part of our experience as young people. So they do things that they shouldn't do, and all that work we've done on that Saturday or Sunday or that evening
is negated, minimized.
Yeah.
And I have to read these statistics because as we were talking, when you started to discuss, I use the word reimagining policing to a certain extent. But, oftentimes we hear terms like defunding, and I want everyone out there to be very clear. I can't imagine society without organized policing. It's very unfortunate that oftentimes, or in certain instances, we see officers that fail to protect and serve. But that is very minimal compared to what I see on a daily basis from people who put themselves in harm's way to protect us. But according to the American Psychological Association, 64% of jail inmates, 54% of state prisoners, and 45% of federal prisoners have reported mental health concerns. A lot of individuals who suffer from mental illness go unnoticed. And another word that I think is really important for us to talk about when we talk about mental illness, number one form is depression. But also a lot of people suffer from trauma. Mm-hmm. Traumatic experiences that affect them for the rest of their lives. I've never been one to give people a crutch. There's no excuse for violence. There's no excuse for harming other people. But when you start to look deep at the data and the numbers, it creates a really alarming and disturbing pattern and picture. And I also want us to define, because I want people that are watching us, that are joining us, to understand, as we said, crime overall in DeKalb is down. Violent crimes are up. And violent crimes are defined as your murders and non-negligent manslaughter, rape, robbery, as well as aggravated assaults. So these are more personal crimes that we're really seeing have a surge across the United States. So as we talk about crime and where we're going, I would like to believe that we can come together and hash out solutions. Because even during this conversation, we talk about the need for community involvement. And I do also want to say, Judge Scott, to your statement, that we should put resources in a certain pot. I know that under the actual recommendation of CEO Thurman, we set aside $1 million for community programming, because we understand the necessity for midnight basketball. We understand the necessity for the tutoring, for the mentoring, and for all these things that oftentimes children don't receive. But if we don't do it on the front end, that's why I believe we have the violence and the crime that we have on the back end. So with that being said, I just want to give you all both an opportunity to share any closing thoughts that you may have, because I can sit here and tell you people are concerned in DeKalb County about violence. They're concerned with homelessness. I'm concerned because I understand the effect that the violence and the crime has on the community that we live in. So it's so much bigger, and we all have to come together. So as you think of what we can do, I'll start with you, Major Hughes, with your closing comments.
I think we have to go back to a sense of community. You mentioned growing up on a farm and how your grandfather was friends with the local sheriff. Mm-hmm. So community policing is something that DeKalb County is trying to bolster and push more. And we have to go back to a sense of community where we looked out for our neighbors. We have to give access to our kids by our neighbors, like it was when I was growing up. When I grew up, anyone on the street had the right and the authority to discipline me or to correct me or to address me if I did something wrong. Now you can't even look at someone's kid too hard without there being, a dispute. So we got to get back to a sense of community, and policing and the community, the churches and the schools, as I mentioned earlier, we've got to join forces and get on the same accord to fight the same battle. We can't operate in a silo independent from one another and expect to see the type of change that we want to see in our communities.
Absolutely. And we should all know our neighbors.
Yes.
It amazes me. And this reminds me of Reverend Dr. William Flippin, because I remember him preaching a sermon, and he said, we have evolved, that we used to sit on the front porch. And when I grew up, we had a great long front porch that spanned the whole house. He said, but then we moved to the back porch. We created a back porch, and we called it the deck. So now you don't know the neighbors that pass your home. And he said, and then because of the resources we had, we fenced it in, and we don't see each other anymore. So human interaction, knowing who your neighbors are, because I truly believe when you know people, you feel more compassion towards them.
You do. And can I add something, Commissioner?
Also, absolutely.
When we talked about law enforcement and serving our community, I think it's important that we encourage people from the community to serve the community. Being a resident of DeKalb County,
right, and
then becoming a law enforcement officer in DeKalb County, there was a certain level of compassion, because I knew a lot of people that I would see on the streets and traffic stops and homes that I would go into. And by me having that connection, sometimes with that individual personally or just with that community, then I tended to respond to them with a different level of compassion.
Yes.
So I think it's important that we encourage people who want to see change be a part of the change.
To be a part of the change. I agree.
And there's a direct correlation between to circle back to what we mentioned earlier, there's a direct correlation between higher paid first responders and educators and their level of crimes than those that are paid on a lower scales. Certain communities, their law enforcement salaries are pretty well.
Absolutely.
Their teachers are paid well. Those students perform better, and those communities tend to have less crime. So we have to factor all that in when we think about, as we talked about earlier.
Yes, because it's all very relevant.
It is very relevant.
Very. And Judge Scott, let's hear from you.
Well, first of all, I want to just commend Major Hughes. He could be the poster boy for what the 50s and 60s were about in bringing people of color and community officers onto the police force. He represents exactly what they thought would happen, that not be empathetic towards crime, but be empathetic towards the community in a way that they understood that we were talking about earlier. My staff, my former staff and I had been together over 20 years, and I used the term, when I was zigging, they knew how to zag, and when they zagged, I knew how to zig. And he represents that for the community. So kudos to you and to the chief and for how well you've done. And I'm an advocate that you be paid for what you're worth.
I agree.
I would just share with you this, that the difference between prison and being a hero. If gangbangers, people who want to be in gangs, if you go and have that prison experience, it's just like when he went through the academy or when I went through basic training. You get there, they shave your head, make it stand straight, be sure your uniform is on correctly, and have you start submitting to authority. So over the years, and this is my 40th year in the law, over the years, I've gone into prisons, seen the inmates, and the correctional officers will make them come to attention. They stand at attention, thumbs down by their sides, stand up in those white uniforms, in the line, the shirt line in your zipper line, they call that a zig line. They're straight, their belts on, their hair is cut, and they stand up at attention. And the difference between normally a prison inmate, if they want to handle a gun, if they want to shoot at people, want to hurt people, is if they go into, and that was one of our options, if they go into the U.S. military, if they join a police force, if they wanted to join the French Legion or go be part of the Israeli Defense Force, they would come back as heroes because people get to shoot back at you and stand up, but you get a paycheck, you're subject to discipline, you're subject to some rules and regulations. And it's a shame to see this army of young men and women in prison because they've made a simple poor choice in values. Because the police force can be your family, the military can be your family, any of these people. If you want to test your courage, go over to Ukraine and let the Russians shoot at you now. You don't have to be a gangbanger. That's serious because they shoot back.
That's right.
I would just say that you're absolutely right, Commissioner. I thank you. Reimagine is the word. Reimagine our community, our society, and it's up to folks like us to help people continue to dream to be a better Dekalb, a better Georgia, a better America.
I agree. And to both of you, let me say first and foremost, thank you for your service. Thank you for your commitment. It takes people who care. And with the generation that we have now, I often say when I go into environments and I'm speaking, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. We have to look at what we're seeing, the crime, the violence, in a different way. We have to acknowledge on the federal level the role that we can play as legislators in creating a framework that helps diminish the presence of guns in our communities. We have to acknowledge that this is based in economics to an extent. We have to create a level playing field so that all people have access to opportunity. And we have to be community, first and foremost. We have to come together, whether it's our police officers, it's our communities, it's our churches, our schools, and we have to join hands. And I truly believe that we have to stop talking in silos because, as I say, it's going to take a conglomerate approach. So thanks for helping have the conversation here today. And thank you all for joining us, whether you're listening or watching. We appreciate you joining us for another edition of the Weekly Chat, where we have conversations on topics that are relevant to you. Thank you.